Welcome to my final Senate prediction for the 2022 midterms, and let's start. And there we go, so let's start off in Iowa. In Iowa, it's incumbent 89-year-old Chuck Grassley against Franken, and Franken has had some scandals, which does prevent him from doing better than what a Democrat could have done in Iowa in 2022. And here are the polls, and you can see that Franken is not in a good spot. Let me see. There's an Emerson poll from almost a month ago right here, and what I think will occur is that Chuck Grassley will not win us by much as before, I think. I mean, who knows really? It's Chuck Grassley. And I believe that Chuck Grassley will win here by a margin of around 16% to 18%. Still strong, but not as much as other times perhaps because of his age. And yeah, so now for another safe race for Connecticut. In Connecticut, it's Blumenthal against Levy, and Connecticut is one of those that could drop to a likely margin, and it's often overlooked by many people. You can see right here, Blumenthal does show that he is around 50 to 55%, but if you take account for the undecided voters, then this race would narrow up, and here's Emerson yet again. I do have this race as a Blumenthal win of 14% to 16%, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's like even lower than that, just around like 12%, but for my final one, 14% to 16%. Moving on to the next one, so for Utah, in Utah with incumbent Mike Lee against independent Democrat-backed Evan McMullen, who is a really great nominee against Mike Lee, the polling does show this to be it's more interesting. There's some iffy polling, sadly, which does skew things like this one right here. No Trafalgar poll, but Emerson did already poll Utah and have polled a lot of places and races. I do have this going to Mike Lee, but by only 13% to 15%, I think. Lee does win, but as long as there's no polling error, I think it's probably gonna be around that margin. And now for Illinois. Illinois is yet again another overlooked race. So Duckworth against Salvi, and what the polling industry is saying is that it is going to be a bit closer than anticipated. Emerson have done a lot of polls if you haven't seen yet, with undecided voters still out there. I do have this race going to Tammy Duckworth by only 12 to 14%. I do have my margins as 12 plus equals safe, by the way. And yeah, Duckworth win in Illinois. While for Missouri, for this former bellwether state, it's Schmidt against Trudy Bush Valentine, the Democrat nominee. And right here you can see there's been a lot of polling, and I think that Eric Schmidt, Eric will win here by a safe margin, barely. I do have him here by 12% to 14%. And before I go into the likely states, briefly for other ones, in New York, I think Schumer will do way worse than before because he's the Senate Majority Leader. And it also depends on how bad Kathy Hochul does. It could, worst case scenario, maybe like 18%, but best case scenario, 25%. It's really gonna depend a lot on how Hochul wins, but I'm gonna say 20% on average, but who knows really. Well, for Indiana, I do have Young winning here by a margin of higher than 15%, just like in Kentucky, where I do see Rand Paul winning by the same margin or similar to Indiana. And now for the likely states. Let's start off in Florida. So Marco Rubio is running against, in re-election bid against Val Demings, the Democrat, and the Florida Democrats are on track to have another woeful year, another awful year by any margins, and polling does have Rubio doing extremely well overall, and the real question is if this race will either be a likely margin for Rubio or a safe margin. I do have DeSantis winning by a safe margin, but it's really hard, but I have Rubio winning by double digits, by 10% to 12%, and just barely missing out on being a safe state, but it could easily just become a safe state because of how close it's going to be to that margin. And yeah, so moreover, for Alaska. In Alaska, it's long-term incumbent Lisa Murkowski against Kelly Tshibaka, who is Trump endorsed and basically the Trump-backed candidate, but because of the ranked choice voting, it's going to be a good year for Lisa Murkowski, and I expect her to do well, as you can see by the polling right here. I do have Lisa Murkowski winning re-election quite, I think, easily, and I do have this anywhere from the margin in Alaska. In Alaska is really hard to predict, but I'm gonna say 10% to 12%, but who knows really because of the ranked choice voting system. And now for Ohio. In Ohio, it's Vance against Tim Ryan, and Vance has gotten a bump in the polls just in the last week of the campaign trail, and you can see right here what the predictions are. This is a bit harder to predict because of the coalition, which could very well be more interesting and more delicate. Emerson, yet again, with another poll, does show Vance almost winning by a safe margin around 9%, and I think with adjusted, I think they had something like 11% in what I saw, which really would be a huge JD Vance win for sure. And I'm not too sure what the margin will be. I'm really stuck between 6% to 10%. I'm gonna say it's going to be a JD Vance win of 6 to 8%, but for sure will probably be around 7.5 or something like that. And this could very well be a double-digit win for the Republicans if things really go well trends-wise in Ohio and all that sort of stuff. But an easy JD Vance win from what it looks like at the moment in my final prediction. But stay on the lookout for the margin of this race on election night. It's gonna be interesting. And now for let's go to Wisconsin. So for Wisconsin, with Ron Johnson running for a third term, even though he said he was gonna retire after a second term, whatever, against Mandela Barnes. Mandela Barnes has really ran a great campaign and had too much baggage. He had too much baggage, and now Ron Johnson is doing quite well. Trafalgar actually does show Ron Johnson by 3%, but there's still 3% undecided. And they have a similar margin to Emerson. I'm not too sure. I will talk about in a second what I'm thinking right now, but I have Wisconsin going by a likely margin. I'm going to say it's going to be a Ron Johnson win of 5 to 7%, I think. I still think it's going to be around 6%, but anything can happen. And now for North Carolina. So for North Carolina, in this open seat, Ted Budd is trying to win here against Cherry Beasley, former, I think, Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court. And the polling industry is saying that Ted Budd will easily win here. No Trafalgar poll, but Emerson does have this as around a 5% win for Ted Budd. And what I wanted to say is that I'm not too sure, well, which state will vote to the right. I think North Carolina and Wisconsin could easily, I'm not too sure if Wisconsin votes to the right of North Carolina or if North Carolina votes to the right of Wisconsin. I could see both of them switching around, which is why I do have this as a 6%. I also win a 5 to 7% for Ted Budd, and let me fix that real quick. And for the following state, I think it's gonna be quite a unique one. For Colorado, so Colorado, just like Ohio, is one that has an interesting coalition by one of the candidates, and is Michael Bennet, the incumbent Democrat, against Joe O'Dea, I think that's how you say his name, and Joe is really trying to build a coalition similar to what Cory Gardner had, and the polling does show Trafalgar does have this as lean DM barely missing out on a Republican win, but Emerson, on the other hand, does show an easy victory for Michael Bennet, and this is a race to look out for. I do have Michael Bennet winning here by 5 to 7%, but it wouldn't amaze me if this would easily drop to a lean state. It could very well do if Joe O'Dea does better than expected, or if the red wave is slightly bigger, but I'm gonna say it's a win for Michael Bennet by 5%, and yeah, and now to Washington. So Washington, for this West Coast state, it's Patty Murray, long-term incumbent, against Stephanie Smiley, and I do wish there was more polling here because it does show this basically stuck between 4% to 6%, and it's basically a toss-up between it being a likely state or a lean state. And this will be one of the races that I'm really looking forward to see the margins, just like Ohio. I do have this as a Patty Murray win of 5% to 7%. Technically, it's basically 4 to 6%, but I'm gonna say it's a likely D, just because of how blue the state is. But stay on the lookout for this race. And now we're getting to the more almost toss-up territory. There's actually no high lean states. All the next ones will be low and are quite competitive. And let's start off firstly in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania, Dr. Ross has ran one of the best pivots since the primary, in my opinion. It's Oz against John Fetterman, and he's really trying to mold himself, Oz, to Pat Toomey quite a lot, and really going for the moderate vote and the Shapiro vote. So we're gonna see a lot, and I mean a lot of Shapiro, or I should say Oz Shapiro voters. And most pollsters do have this as a toss-up, or yeah, around that margin. And this will be close no matter what. I think it's going to be within 3 points. I don't see Oz. Here's Emerson, by the way. I don't see Oz getting more than 3 points unless the red wave is bigger than what I expect. I do have Dr. Oz winning here by a lean margin. I think the in-person vote saves him, literally. If it wasn't for that, I think John Fetterman could actually have a decent chance, but the in-person and Shapiro voters will go and help Dr. Oz win here by 1.5% to 2%, if I'm guessing right. But there's so many things that could happen, since if John Fetterman is able to get enough Obama Trump supporters, he could make this closer. And don't forget that if Mastriano does horribly, then this race would easily drop down to a tilt, a margin. But if there's a polling error, there's also polling errors, which is another factor, by the way. But I'm gonna say Oz won here. And now for another close race for Nevada. So Nevada Democrats just had an amazing day in mail-ins on Saturday night, by the way. And they would need a couple more days of that in order to really get lucky. And it's Masto against Adam Laxalt. And Laxalt is doing okay, and he is on track around to get around a decent lead against Cortez Masto. Emerson does show this as almost a landslide win for Adam Laxalt by around 5%, and I think if they got that spot on, then kudos to them. But I do have Adam Laxalt winning here by within 1 to 2 points. It depends on a lot of things because of the mail-in ballots that could really make this race even closer, maybe even tilt R. And I'm gonna say Adam Laxalt wins here by 1.2 to 1.5%, around that margin. But who knows? There's still so much to be undecided. But yeah, I'm gonna say that is the margin, and let's see what happens. And now for New Hampshire. So New Hampshire is an underrated race to talk about, since according to some pollsters, Don Bolduc right here is making some gains against Maggie Hassan. And Maggie Hassan, according to Emerson, will win here by around 4%. Trafalgar does show the opposite and shows Don Bolduc winning, which is quite rare to see Emerson and Trafalgar having different people winning, and shows you how close this race will be. I will 100% drop this from likely D from last video. I'm sorry about that. I'm not too sure. This could easily drop down to till D. I do have a Maggie Hassan win of like in my election night, of 0.5% to 2%, and I'm gonna say she wins here by 1.25%. I think it will be quite closer, and could it's going to be closer than what most people think. And I do have her winning here by barely a lean margin, but wouldn't be surprised if it drops to tilt. It will be another solid New Hampshire moment. But yeah, that's it. Moreover, for another key race in these midterms for Arizona, with Mark Kelly against who is incumbent, by the way, against Blake Masters, the Republican. A lot of people have this race in many places. I've seen lean D, lean R, and this will really come down to the fact that them person voting alongside, by the way, Mark Victor did in fact drop out and endorse Masters, which could be a really good sign for Masters. That probably gains him 0.25% of voters, but still Victor will be on the ballot because it was too late of a dropout. And I do have this really being one of the closest states in these midterms. So if you live in Arizona, this really could, your vote could count a lot. And I'm gonna say because of Katie Hobbs, I do have Blake Masters winning here by a tall margin. I think Katie Hobbs will maybe perhaps sink Mark Kelly and drag him down with her, and I do have Blake Masters winning here by a margin of 0.5% to 0.75%. And one of the closest races of this year. And now for Georgia with Raphael Warnock, the incumbent, against Herschel Walker. So this one is one of those that, who knows what could happen. We could see a Warnock win on November 8th. We could see a Walker win on November 8th. We could also just see it go into a runoff, which could very well happen. Trafalgar, is there one from... Oh, no, I don't think so. But Emerson does show... interestingly, they do have a Warnock win by around 50%, around that margin. The last Trafalgar does show the opposite, literally does have a Walker win of 2%. And here's my take on what will happen. I have this race almost certainly going into a runoff. I have it like around 67% chance of it going into a runoff. But because I think the Democrats will be more demoralized, it is Herschel Walker, but I'm going to say the economy will be worse by that time, I'm guessing. And it's going to be way worse with higher gas prices and all that sort of stuff. I do see. At the moment, I do have Walker barely winning there by a who knows the margin, but it's going to be it's a toss-up by all means. And yeah, so as you can see, the Republicans won with 52 seats against the Democrats' 47 seats. But wait, before you go, I will be live on Tuesday over at Empire State Politics channel. Subscribe to him if you haven't yet. A chill guy, and it's gonna be quite fun, and I hope to see you there on Tuesday night. And yeah, that's my final Senate prediction. Feel free to leave a like, and see you next time.